Hi everybody, I'm Josh Klein. This is Bethany Cook. We are Hades Hollow and Persephone's Purse. We're going to be popping out another video for you guys today. We have a special guest with us, Max, who will be joining in the merriment. So stay tuned. We're going to be doing another drop at the end of the week, putting out some cool stuff. So what do you guys want to do today?
Well, I actually have a question from one of your Twitter followers. Wants to know which one is Hades Hollow and which one is Persephone's Purse.
I'm the purse.
Okay.
Obviously.
Thank you.
So, what's on the agenda?
Story time?
Story time. Story?
Sure, I can go for a story.
I'm going to slip into something more comfortable. There we go. That's much better. So once upon a time, a girl no more than 13 years of age laid on the ground, stared up at the stars, and fell asleep. Anya dreamed she was in a strange, sprawling valley in the shadow of a mountain. In this valley, there were 4 villages: the village of I, the village of you, the village of me, and the faraway village of thou. She dreamt that the first 3 villages were divided by a forked river named Yesterday. When looking towards the river's source, it was called Yesterday. When looking at the river as it flowed past the villages, they called it Tomorrow. In addition to the river's natural segmentation of the villages, I, you, and me were also divided in every other way imaginable. In no way more so than in their speech. The people of I spoke Iish, the people of you spoke Youish, and the people from me spoke Meish. Nobody knew what the folks in thou spoke. It was too far away and at the top of a mountain to boot. So none of the villages liked each other. In fact, there had been a disdain for each other's languages and customs for as long as anyone could remember. None of the villages spoke each other's language, so the people spent countless hours yelling at each other over the rushing river in their foreign languages, their foreign tongues. All of the people in I began their sentences with I, and all of the people in you began their sentences with you. And all of the people who lived in me finished their sentences with me. So in the village in her dream, Anya couldn't speak. She had adapted her communication to a series of celebratory bodily movements and physical responses. Nobody quite understood them, so nobody paid any attention to Anya. Poor girl. Anya was accustomed to playing games with nature, who always seemed to want to play. She would turn her head up and try to smile as big as the sun when it shined on her. When it rained hard, she would stamp her feet like big drops of rain. The rains enjoyed this, though they never explicitly said so. They did respond, though, in their way. They poured oceans into drops, and drops raced faster and harder in response to her. This pleased Anya. Sometimes the rain cheated, though. Cheated at stamping, is what you like to call it. When the rain and clouds would thunder and automatically win. When Anya saw the flowers and tall grass reaching for the sun, she would cast her arms upward, reaching high. Reach and stretch was her favorite game to play with the flowers, because she always won. She tried to play with some trees once, but quickly realized they were much better than she. Anya wagered they just had more practice. They'd been playing longer. Today, though, in a dream of a day, or a daydream, Anya had no desire to play her usual games with nature. Her attention was immediately claimed by the terrible shouting of the villagers, who were shouting over the rushing river, shouting in their terrible tones and tongues foreign to one another. Anya waved her arms and threw her body from side to side. to no avail. They wouldn't stop. Not that they ever did. It had no impact or effect on her fellow citizens of Ai. With all the people of all the villages shouting at the top of their lungs, Anya decided she had had enough. She'd had enough of the shouting, enough of the noise, enough of the people who didn't care about her. She had had enough of all of it. And having had enough, she would seek respite in the unknown, maybe even find some quiet. But the only quiet place, she wagered, was the village of Thou. No sounds ever came from Thou. Since the river flowed from the mountain, the first village it passed was in fact Thou, which was placed on the mountain. That was common knowledge, even Anya knew it. So, Anya decided that she would climb into her small canoe, pick up an oar, and paddle up yesterday to the village of Thou. When she tried to get into the canoe, she was met with a cacophony of voices speaking in Aish. I don't think you can row that far. I know a better place to go. I don't think it's a good idea to pass by the village of Iuumii. I think maybe she wants to take her canoe to Thou. I know there's nothing in Thou, and even if there were, I know that no one there will care. I think the canoe will sink. Another voice said, I know it's a waste of time. I know it's a waste of work. I can row better. I know the best ways to row. I think she's useless. Finally, the last voice said, I think she'll be back. Despite the voices, she took a breath and began to paddle. In her canoe, moving upriver and passing along the opposite bank, people began shouting in Yuish. You don't belong here. You can't row that far. You should turn around. You aren't the right size. You aren't the right shape. You aren't the right gender. You don't have the right clothes. You don't speak the right language. You can't speak at all. You are irresponsible. You will get lost. You will get tired. You don't belong there. You call that a canoe? You can't go that way. But she kept on paddling. Now, in passing by the village of Me, she heard more shouting. This time it was in Miish. Now, we have to pause because it has to be said, unlike the people doing all the shouting, Anya seemed to have an instinct regarding the meanings of the things being shouted. She didn't understand the languages of you or me. She didn't understand them, and she didn't speak at all, but some part of her could feel those shouts, both in a deep way, but also she could feel what they meant. They struck her in the right way. But to the voices, a canoe ride is pointless without me. What does your canoeing have to do with me? How does your trip benefit me? If you're trying to exhaust yourself, why don't you exhaust yourself by helping me? I like your canoe. Give it to me. The shouting went on, but she kept on paddling. The shouts from the villages had placed upon her heavy feelings of sadness, though, as did her failed attempts to communicate in response through any of her bodily movements. The sadness, not long after, overwhelmed her. So this was the point in her paddling upriver where she thrashed her arms, cursing herself and her inability to communicate. A loneliness washed over her, and she stopped paddling. She cried, and so did the sky. She cried harder, and so did the sky. When the sky stopped, so did she. Realizing that she was now flowing quickly down the river of tomorrow, being carried away from the river of yesterday. All of that crying that Anya and the sky had done had only further filled the river. she immediately started paddling against the now racing water. And now at this point, with all the force she could muster, for somebody who communicated with her body, she had the strength to do so. It was this force and determination that she finally landed on the banks of Thou. Now, it was a common belief that Thou had been abandoned long ago, but standing at the threshold of the village was an old woman. Anya approached her and explained her difficult journey through deep spiraling motions, creating circles and cycles with her arms and legs. And this was done from a place of much needed expression. She just needed to vent. Not because she had any extant hope of being understood, because no one understood Anya at any point ever, except for nature. But the old woman then spoke. That sounds like a difficult journey indeed. You're the first person to return to Thou. Baffled and confused, Anya cautiously began to ask with her body why the village was empty. She also inquired as to how the woman could understand her. The old woman said, I'm older than I look, and apparently so are you, because you speak the old language perfectly. I was here the day the sound was misplaced and the people stopped moving. I was here when they stopped celebrating. I was here when Thou was abandoned. I watched the people descend and create new villages. I watched the people give birth to new generations until the word Iuumii was forgotten, split apart and its fragments used to separate and create separateness. Then one day, 1,000 years later, maybe it was the same day, maybe it was minutes later, I lose track of time, I watched a young girl appear in the world, a girl who had no ability to speak the languages of separateness. I watched her rediscover the first language and paddle up yesterday, refuse to be carried off by tomorrow, and find the village of Thou today. Thank you for finding your way home, daughter. But child, respite from the noise is not what you require. Something to cut through the noise is what's needed. Take this back to the villages. I've named it Drum. It can recreate the original sound. Some think it was a word at the start of all things. Nay, nay, it was the sound. When you get to the villages, whichever you land in first, beat the heart of the mountain, this drum, to make the forgotten sound, and it will awaken the listening heart in each of them. Just as the rain taps the ground to your tears, their hearts will hear the drum and thump in response. That's old wisdom coming in. And wisdom is only heard through a listening heart. Go to the other villages and do the same. Cut through their noise with this ancient heartbeat, and she hands the drum to her. Opening their hearts will reweave the people of I, you, and me back into the sublime tapestry of we, from which they've fallen. It's the forgotten timeless fabric and cloth of their divine selves, and this is how Iuumii is remembered. Iuumii means we. And when all their hearts open, becoming old friends again in the process, teach them the first language, the dance. Now, daughter Anya, when you sail down tomorrow moves fast. Sailing down the mountain, down tomorrow, makes for a very, very bumpy ride. It'll be hard to steer. And at many points, you're going to feel like you've lost control of your canoe. It's going to spin you around. Sometimes you'll be going down backwards. But if you hold on tightly, Trust the current. Trust the canoe. Trust yourself. You'll arrive safely. Anya then woke up from this dream, stepped out into the village of Ai, walked to the river, dismissed the voices and shouts, got in her canoe, dipped her oar into yesterday, and began her journey to thou. The end.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
That all fit on that one page.
Yeah, totally.
Small writing.
It's bigger on the inside.